Hey, this is Pastor Ryan. Thanks for joining us for this week's Sunday Preview. Our passage today is Matthew chapter 23, verses 13 through 39. Let's get right into the passage. In our first section, we see the first two woes. Jesus repeatedly calls them hypocrites, and he identifies his audience, the scribes and the Pharisees. And he gives three reasons why they're being condemned. In the next section, we find the third woe. We have a repeated word. Jesus calls them blind. The center of the critique seems to be the phrases that the Pharisees are using. And Jesus points out two different principles that they aren't understanding. But then Jesus gives an extended corrective in verses 20 through 22. In the next section, we see the fourth woe. And Jesus again describes his audience, calling them hypocrites. He gives a reason by describing their tithe, noting that they give mint and dill and cumin, before describing the underlying principle they are failing to understand. For a fourth time, he calls them blind, and we see a vivid word picture as Jesus describes them as straining out a gnat and swallowing a camel. The fifth woe starts in verse 25 to the scribes and the Pharisees, and again Jesus calls them hypocrites. He gives another reason and describes the underlying failure, and for a fifth time calls them blind, employing a different word picture, that of the cup and the plate. The sixth woe begins in verse 27, and Jesus again describes his audience and calls them hypocrites, followed by the reason with a different word picture, that of the whitewashed tombs. It appears their failure is that they want to outwardly appear beautiful, but within they're full of dead people's bones and all uncleanness. Jesus nails down their failure, pointing a second time to their outward appearance, and there's a clear contrast with the internal state of their soul, being full of hypocrisy and lawlessness. We get to the final woe in verse 29, and again to the scribes and the Pharisees, calling them hypocrites, giving another reason, as he describes their professed innocence, but that Jesus sees through their innocence, calling them serpents and a brood of vipers. Jesus gives them a test case and says they're going to demonstrate their guilt, giving a final consequence, and the conclusion that truly, I say to you, all these things will come upon this generation. In verse 37, we see an audience change, no longer the scribes and the Pharisees, rather Jerusalem. And Jesus says that they both kill the prophets and stone those who are sent to it. Jesus says he would have gathered the children of Jerusalem together, but that they had made a decision and were not willing to come. There's another word picture as Jesus describes a hen gathering her brood and gives a vivid contrast, saying he would have protected them, but now their house is left desolate. But he gives them a promise that they will not see him again until a condition is met. They must say, "Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord." Next, we want to take a step back and look at some of the broader observations. First, we see a number of groups and individuals in this passage, including the scribes, the Pharisees, people's faces, proselytes, a gift giver, God, dead bones, prophets, the righteous, murderers, Abel, Zechariah, Jesus, a group called this generation, Jerusalem, children, and the Lord. What is going on in this passage then? It looks like we see Jesus pronouncing woes on scribes and Pharisees, listing various symptoms of their disobedience, showing how they are just as corrupt as their forefathers who had rejected God's prophets. He laments their decision and their rejection, but appears to give a hope for future restoration. As we noted previously, this comes following interactions with scribes and Pharisees in chapter 22. But there are a number of time references within the passage, as the Pharisees point to the past, Jesus points to the future, and Jesus describes a point further in the future. We've noted prior that this is happening in the temple. And why might this passage be here? It might be here to make clear the main charges against the scribes and the Pharisees, and it might be here to deliver a final verdict of condemnation. But it also might be here to provide a hope for their restoration, as Jesus says, until you say, "Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord." Before we go, we have some final questions for you to think through as you prepare for this Sunday morning. First, where is chapter 23, verse 14? And why is this not in the ESV? Second, Is there a main problem that ties together all these woes, or are they separate categories throughout this passage? Third, how many of these symptoms might be seen in the religious of our day, even if they might look different? And fourth, I think it's interesting to take a look at the word pictures, such as straining out the gnat and swallowing a camel, whitewashed tombs, a chicken or brood. What are we supposed to learn from these word pictures that we might not be able to grasp from Jesus' other descriptions? Why are those word pictures so powerful? Thanks for joining us for the Sunday Preview. We hope this spurs on your thinking and prepares you for our time together on Sunday morning. God's blessings on your week.